Please join me and welcome Mauricio Montiel.
Good evening. Thank you very much. Thanks, Juvenal, for the presentation and for the invitation. Thanks, Kate, for all the troubles regarding technical matters. And many thanks to Anna, who is not only my companion, but my main technical advisor, and who is the responsible for this presentation that we're going to watch and listen. As Juvenal has already said, my presentation has to do with writing and technology. So I'm going to talk about, first it's divided in two parts, my presentation. First I'm going to do like an introduction about how writing became from, the long past to the present era, and then I'm gonna read some of my some parts of my most recent work, who has already been translated into English by a really awesome and spectacular translator. The name may sound to you, Susan Jill Devine. She teaches at Santa Barbara University, and she is the responsible for bringing into a great English such difficult authors as Guillermo Cabrera Infante and Manuel Puig. She is also the responsible for editing the complete works of Jorge Luis Borges in Penguin Classics here in the United States. So I'm honored that she is now translating me into English. But that's going to be the second part of my presentation. So, well, let's start. The presentation is called The Man in Tweed, Fiction in the Time of Twitter. I must say that I bought this tweed jacket especially for the occasion today. So, well, let's get into it. Paper and ink are the only two instruments that a real writer needs to do his job. Paper was invented in ancient China between 206 BC and 220 AD and spread slowly to the west via the so-called Silk Road. Chinese inks can be traced back to the 23rd century BC with the utilization of natural plant, animal, and mineral inks that were ground with water and applied with ink brushes. India ink, this is a very kind of special information, at least for me. India ink was first invented in China, although the source of materials to make the carbon pigment was later often traded from India. The manufacture of India ink was well established around 220 or 265 AD. Writing with ink on a sharp pointed needle was common in early South India. Several Buddhist and Jain sutras were compiled in ink. And we have the first fountain pen that dates back to 953 AD, when a caliph from Egypt demanded a pen that would not stain his hands or his clothing. The writing of language was invented independently in at least two places: Mesopotamia around 200 BC and Mesoamerica around 600 BC. There are two options according to the specialists. Either writing systems were developed completely independently in Egypt around 3200 BC and in China around 1200 BC, or else the appearance of writing in either or both places was due to cultural diffusion. Chinese characters are probably an independent invention. There is no evidence of contact between China and the literate civilizations of the Near East. Egyptian script is dissimilar from Mesopotamian cuneiform, but similarities in concepts and in earliest attestation suggest that the idea of writing may have come to Egypt from Mesopotamia. The specialists distinguish three main developmental stages in the writing systems. The first one, the picture writing system, where glyphs represent objects and concepts. The second one, the so-called transitional system, where graphemes refer to the object or idea and also to its name. And finally, the phonetic system, where graphemes refer to sounds or spoken symbols. There is this great French historian, Roger Chartier. He has specialized in 18th and 19th century literary culture and written culture especially. And according to him, there are three essential periods in the evolution of written culture. The first one is dated between the 2nd and 4th centuries, and it's called the Codex. Let me find the definition of the Codex. Here it is. Roger Chartier says this thing about the Codex: the circulation of a new kind of book that is still the one we know. The book composed of sheets and pages brought together within the same binding, the book that we call Codex and that replaced the roles of ancient Greece and Rome. The second period is dated between the 14th and 15th centuries, and it has to do with what is called the Unitary Book. What Roger Chartier says about the Unitary Book is the following thing: the emergence of the Unitary Book, that is, the presence within the same manuscript of works written in vulgar language by one sole author, because previously the relationship was characteristic only of ancient and Christian canonical authorities and of works written in Latin. Finally, the last period, according to Roger Chartier, is dated in the 15th century with the invention of the printing press by Gutenberg. The invention of the printing press, says Roger Chartier, which until today remains the most used technique for reproducing texts. The history of literature begins with the history of writing. The oldest surviving literary texts date from a full millennium after the invention of writing to the late 3rd millennium BC. Nowadays, a sole device, the computer, makes appear in front of the reader the different kinds of texts previously distributed among different objects. That is what the French historian Roger Chartier says. Now we're going to the little history about typewriters and computers. Some of you are very young and maybe don't even know how a typewriter looks like, but there were some of us who actually, wrote in typewriters many ages ago. The concept of a typewriter dates back at least to 1714, thanks to the English inventor Henry Mill, who patented a machine for transcribing letters. That's how he called his invention. The first typewriter proven to have worked was built by the Italian Pellegrino Turri in 1801 for his blind lover, Countess Carolina Fantoni di Fivizzano. Successful commercial production of typewriters began until 1870 with the so-called writing ball of Danish pastor Rasmus Malling Hansen. On March 1, 1873, E. Remington and Sons manufactured the first commercial typewriter, which soon became a success and a dominant presence in the industry. Christopher Latham Sholes, a Milwaukee newspaperman, poet, and part-time inventor, was the main creator of the influential Sholes and Glidden typewriter, which appeared on the American market in 1874. The Sholes and Glidden typed only in capital letters, and it introduced the so-called QWERTY keyboard, which came to be called the Universal Keyboard, and which is the keyboard with which we work still today in the computers, most of the world. Well, and then there were computers. I made a timeline of the history of computers. There are some interesting information here. In 1890, Herman Hollerith designs a punch card system to calculate the 1880 US Census, accomplishing the task in just 3 years. They say just 3 years. He establishes a company that would ultimately become IBM, founded in 1911. 1941, John Vincent Atanasoff and his graduate student Clifford Berry designed a computer that can solve 29 equations simultaneously. This marks the first time a computer is able to store information on its main memory. Between 1943 and 1944, John Mauchly and J. Presper Eckert built the Electronic Numerical Integrator and Calculator, ENIAC, the grandfather of digital computers. I will say the great-grandfather. 1953, a woman, Grace Hopper, develops the first computer language, which eventually becomes known as COBOL. In 1958, Jack Kilby and Robert Noyce unveiled the integrated circuit known as the computer chip. There it is. In 1964, Douglas Engelbart shows a prototype of the modern computer with a mouse and a graphical user interface, GUI. In 1975, the IBM 5100 becomes the first commercially available portable computer, the first laptop. Well, imagine that. In 1976, Steve Jobs and Steve Wozniak start Apple Computers and roll out the Apple I, the first computer with a single circuit board. There's Steve Jobs on the left-hand corner giving a talk. Then, 1979, word processing becomes a reality as Micropro International releases the program WordStar. In 1981, the first IBM personal computer, the Acorn, is introduced. It popularizes the term PC, personal computer. In 1985, the first .com domain, symbolics.com, is registered years before the World Wide Web, would mark the formal beginning of Internet history. In 1999, the term Wi-Fi becomes part of the computer language and users begin connecting to the Internet without wires. Finally, in 2007, the iPhone brings many computer functions to the smartphone. Okay, now we're going to talk a little about the social networks. Early social networking on the internet began in the form of generalized online communities. GeoCities from 1994, theglobe.com from 1995, and tripod.com from 1995. Many of these early communities focused on bringing people together to interact with each other through chat rooms. New social networking methods were developed by the end of the 1990s, and many sites began to develop more advanced features for users to find and manage friends. The newer generation of social networking sites began to flourish with the emergence of seatdegrees.com in 1997. Other sites, such as Makeout Club, launched in 2000, Hub Culture and Friendster, both launched in 2002, soon became part of the internet mainstream. MySpace and LinkedIn were launched in 2003 to an almost instant success. Launched in 2004, Facebook became the largest social networking site in the world in early 2009. Facebook was first introduced as a Harvard social networking site, expanding to other universities and eventually anyone. And then came Twitter, which was launched in 2006. The service rapidly gained worldwide popularity, with more than 100 million users who only in the year 2002 posted 340 million tweets per day. Based in San Francisco, Twitter was created in March 2006 by Jack Dorsey, Ivan Williams, Biz Stone, and Noah Glass. There are the four of them. In a session held at the podcasting company Audio, Dorsey introduced the idea of an individual using an SMS service to communicate with a small group. This is the first diagram of what was to become Twitter. The original project code name for the service was TWTTR, an idea inspired by Flickr and the 5-character length of American SMS shortcodes. Dorsey published the first Twitter message on March 21, 2006. And his message was, just setting up my Twitter. We came across the word Twitter, and it was just perfect. The definition was a short burst of inconsequential information and chirps from birds. That's what Jack Dorsey says about Twitter. The first Twitter prototype was used as an internal service for audio employees, and the full version was introduced publicly on July 15, 2006. Twitter spun off into its own company in April of 2007. Twitter actually changed from what we thought it was in the beginning. We eventually came to think of it as more of an information network than a social network. That's what Evan Williams, another one of the Twitter founders, says. In 2009, American novelist, well-known novelist Rick Moody, wrote a short story called Some Contemporary Characters, composed entirely of tweets. Moody was one of the first authors to explore the literary potential of Twitter. He said in an interview, "There are, as yet, no handholds for how to pace a Twitter story. It's a Wild West environment, really." Nowadays, that Wild West environment has been conquered by many authors from all over the world: poets and novelists, playwrights and essayists, screenwriters and short fiction writers, who strongly believe that Twitter is a new ideal platform for creating, sharing, and reading literature. In 2007, cyberpunk eminence Bruce Sterling said that using Twitter for literate communication was about as likely as firing up a CB radio and hearing some guy recite the Iliad. Well, today we can actually read someone tweeting not only the Iliad, but also the complete works of William Shakespeare or Don Quixote, for example. Terms such as twiterature and tweet fiction have been coined, explored, and accepted by the literary world. The Song of the Little Blue Bird has gained some pretty good lyrics. To better understand what twiterature, what we call twiterature, is about, let me quote James Knight, a fantastic British writer who in Twitter goes by the name of That Bad Poet, and who has taken the time to reflect on this new form of literature. The tweet can be considered a literary form in itself. Single tweet pieces have their limitations. Longer forms, comprising series of tweets, are a solution to this problem. The ephemerality of the tweet gives it a spectral quality that cannot be achieved by the solidity of black ink on a white page. At least 90% of twiterature is crap. Solipsism, banality, empty paradoxes, glib philosophy, and incompetent writing abound. And James finishes saying, Twitter provides something with which conventional publishing, including self-published books, can never compete. In 2009, the same year that Rick Moody wrote his story comprised only of tweets, American novelist Matt Stewart turned to Twitter as a way to distribute his book, The French Revolution, to interested readers while generating publicity and media attention. Stewart was called a pioneer by CNN.com and received worldwide media coverage for his Twitter experiment, which lasted over 4 months. The French Revolution was released in traditional book form by Soft Skull Press on Bastille Day, July 14, 2010. It was named a best book of 2010 by the San Francisco Chronicle. Publishing needs to change, and while I'm not going to revolutionize the industry on my own, I think I can help nudge it toward a more dynamic and customer-friendly future. That's what the French Revolution author Matt Stewart says. This I have condensed in 5 ideas what I think about what we call tweet fiction. Tweet fiction doesn't necessarily have to do with cutting up in small pieces story written in a conventional way. It has more to do with conciseness and precision. Tweet fiction can be divided into big groups. Stories written in 140 characters and episodic narratives comprising series of tweets. Tweet fiction can take days, weeks, and even months building a story that goes in and out of the timeline at different times. Tweet fiction calls for the suspension of disbelief of the reader that wants to be dazzled by a series of narrative lightning bolts. Tweet fiction follows the traditional principles of the short story, beginning, middle, end, in a very limited space. This is the magic of brevity. Now we're going to see some examples of literary writing on Twitter or tweet fiction. I selected 7 examples that for me are very interesting. The first one is a short story written by the Pulitzer Prize winner novelist Jennifer Egan in The New Yorker in May of 2012. These are the first tweets of the story. I'm gonna read them for you. The story you can find the whole story in the New Yorker fiction web page. It's really a really good story. Well, I think Jennifer Egan is a really good writer. Okay. People rarely look the way you expect them to, even when you've seen pictures. The first 30 seconds in a person's presence are the most important. If you're having trouble perceiving and projecting, focus on projecting. Necessary ingredients for a successful projection: giggles, bare legs, shyness. The goal is to be both irresistible and invisible. When you succeed, a certain sharpness will go out of his eyes. Some powerful men actually call their beauties beauty. Counter to reputation, there is a deep camaraderie among beauties. Well, this is the first lines from the Jennifer Egan story. I strongly recommend that you keep reading the story in the New York Fiction webpage. Then we have the example, well, this is the New York Fiction Twitter page. And the second example is James Knight. I already read some of his concepts about literature a few minutes ago. And he is also doing a visual and textual experiment on Twitter, on his Twitter page, that for me is really, really awesome. He does these things called Oneira Graphs that are like collage from different images that he takes from different places and assembles to do what he calls an Oneira Graph, the image of a dream. So here we have the image, the Oneira Graph of a dream experienced by Canadian novelist Margaret Atwood on Monday, 23rd September at 2:23 a.m. and forgotten on waking. There are only 2 examples of Oneira Graphs. The next one is, he made this for me, actually. I'm known as El Hombre de Tweet, as the man in tweet in Spanish, that's my Twitter account. And this is the Oneira Graph of a dream experienced by me at 2:37 a.m. on Monday, 11th November. He goes into my dreams also. This is the Twitter page of James Knight, but known as Bad Poet. Then we have this example of, I don't know if this guy is American or British, but either way, he's really, really good at making like these small Twitter poems, like almost Twitter haikus. And he writes a lot of them. This is one of them. The mind pretends everything, and it's, cut like in different verses, like this. This is presented in his Twitter page. The mind pretends everything in the universe is separate and not an endless ocean of atoms from the nucleus of now to the farthest star. We have another one. The gift of snow is whiteness, all the gaudy, dirty, muddy trash, the grit and detritus of world becomes one white, silent, ancient earth. Ice unwrapped the gift of now, tear away the tissue of dreams to let in the light of incandescent moments, evanescent in the teeth of time. Those who have escaped the land of the past find it in dust under the bed, secreted in dark corners, hidden in closets, in shoes and garments. The stones are laid like the words in lines of poems, so they fit to hold back the erosion as time slides downhill. This is his Twitter page. He always wears this strange, like funny red hat. Well, this is Boyarsky. Then we have this great science fiction writer, Jeff Noon. He writes really, he doesn't write a lot in Twitter. He writes off Twitter mostly. But when he gets in Twitter, he does this really magnificent, like really short stories in 140 characters. And I have some examples right here. Okay, I'm gonna read them. Witnesses say, just really pay attention to the awesome way that he has to write these really short stories. Witnesses say he stepped off the building slip, a homemade bird mask covering his face. The body has not been found, only a few feathers. The police have left. I lie down in the chalk outline of their body on the carpet and fall into the first peaceful sleep I've had in years. He's really, really good doing this. I buried your ghost in dirt. It rose up. I buried it in cement. It rose up. I buried it in flesh in my neighbor's body. It stayed buried. The musician dreams, and the strings of her violin vibrate across the barrier of sleep, sounding their nocturne, only to fade upon waking. We've had all the mirrors in the house inoculated against intruders' faces. To no avail. The strangers return a little older each morning. That's his Twitter page. Sorry. Then we have this really interesting case of another pretty well-known writer, Philip Pullman, the author of the Golden Compass. And he, for many months, for 3 or 4 months, wrote this story about a fly, Jeffrey the Fly. So it's quite interesting. You can find it completely in. He doesn't have a web page, as far as I know, but you can find if you Google Philip Pullman plus Jeffrey the Fly, you can find the whole story. I'm going to read only the beginning. It's a really funny story, and it gets getting weirder and weirder all the time. And it's about a fly. Jeffrey, our resident fly, is the most polite insect I've ever met. He leaves our food alone, but sits on my shoulder to read the Oxford Times. Jeffrey carefully avoided a picture of George Osborne in the paper, but spent 20 minutes happily sitting on Stuart Lee's face. This morning, Jeffrey, very agitated by presence of large spider in kitchen sink, needed reassurance. Badly disturbed by an article on monetary policy, Jeffrey flew very close to the frying pan and almost perished among the bubble and squeak. Jeffrey, listless, melancholic. My fault. I left the volume of French verse open on the kitchen table, and he had spent the night on Baudelaire. He's really great. The whole story is, and then there comes many other insects, that interact with Jeffrey, and it's a whole story about gangsters, among insects and so on. This is his Twitter page. Then we have another experiment, like the French Revolution by Matt Stewart. This one is called the Tweetheart novel, written by Douglas Sovereign, and actually is a novel that is set in Berkeley, here in Berkeley. And I'm going to read about this a little bit. Tweetheart is a Twitter novel written entirely in tweets, published 140 characters at a time, live on Twitter. It is the story of Zoe, a bright but troubled young woman living on the streets of Berkeley, California, who becomes estranged from her family and friends. She starts communicating with them again only through Twitter, opening a window into her dangerous and mysterious life, sharing her experiences through a real-time online diary. The story began on 1/11/11 and ended on 11/11/11. That's 10 months. There was no outline and no rewriting, so Tweetheart was raw, live, and rough. This is what the author is saying about his novel. I wrote between 5 and 12 tweets each day, usually in the morning hours, all written from Zoe's point of view, as if she were the one tweeting. I often wrote it on my iPhone from the very streets where it takes place. It was the first Twitter novel of its kind, a story written on the fly in the voice of a tweeting protagonist. In the end, there were more than 1,600 tweets, equal to 150 pages of writing. They are all archived here in his webpage, in the Tweetheart webpage, in the order they were sent. Yes, for those who are wondering, Zoe, my main character, is based loosely on a real person. My longtime significant other fell into a spiral of substance abuse, mental illness, and homelessness. She did not survive it. Tweetheart is a fictionalized account of what she went through. I started wondering, what if she had been part of the social network generation? How might that have changed her experience? The story is heavily fictionalized, but it is based on real-life events and emotions. And I'm going to read only the first part of the novel. I don't pretend to belong here. I don't really belong anywhere. Sometimes I feel like a fraud on the street, but less than I did in school, or in college, or at home, or at my job, or in real life, in the real world. This world is so much more real than any I have ever lived before. I doubt very many people would understand that. Most people live fake lives in fake houses, eating fake food. They go to fake jobs where they fake smiles at fake friends. Then they go home and have fake orgasms with their fake husbands. My orgasms have never been so real as they are out here. I can't remember the last time I cried while making love. I cry every time now. This is the first part of the Twitter novel. This is the Twitter page. You can find also the story here. It's really great. I think it's a really great story, great novel. Then I think this is the this is the last example. This is a Hungarian poet and translator who lives in the United Kingdom. We have met only through Twitter. We're going to meet in person next April in the London Book Fair. We're going to share a roundtable about Twitter and new technologies and literature, etc. And I think George, he's also really great. He can go from writing short poems like Boyarsky, the man I showed before, to really short stories like Jeff Noon, or episodic narratives, a series of tweets, which is this example. She put the word down by his hand. He picked it up and examined. It was breathing. It had a scent. He popped it into his mouth. He drew a word from his pocket. It was old and yellowed. Give it to me, she said. I'll wear it when it occurs to me to do so. Maybe tomorrow. See this word, love, he said. You can have it. I have more back home, but none as nice as this. Try it. It was hotter than she had expected. She held the word at arm's length. She had the most beautiful arms. The word was not important. It was the arms, the hands, the fingers. There is a word in my mouth, she said. Open, he said. Yes, I think I can see it. Breathe gently. It's one of mine. Now blow. And this is George's Twitter page. Well, before reading my own work, I want to make a conclusion. At the beginning, I said that paper and ink are the only technology that a real writer needs to do his job. But, computers and platforms like Twitter can give literature a necessary nudge toward new readers. The screens of the present don't ignore written culture. On the contrary, they transmit it and multiply it. The mutations of our present modify everything at once: mediums for writing, techniques for its reproduction and dissemination, ways of reading. This simultaneity is unprecedented in the history of mankind. This is what French historian Roger Chartier says. Thank you very much. Now I'm going to read some of my work. These obscure images we made, that Anna made into a loop, are from the Italian artist Franco Rasma. I found him quite casually buying a book here at the SF MoMA many years ago, and I fell in love with these images instantaneously. So this is my avatar in Twitter. This is the man in tweet as I imagine him. This is my character. So we're going to leave the loop, and I'm going to read some of my work, the work that I do in Twitter since 2011. First, I'm going to read a small introduction, also translated by Susan Jill Devine into English, to talk about, to tell you about this project, what this project is about. This is called A Man of Tweets. I saw him on Monday, March 7, 2011, at midday. I noticed him because he was dressed in a manner more suited to winter than to spring, which was already proclaiming its sultry languor in bloom amid the jacarandas that were spreading their purple fire along the streets of Mexico City. He was about to cross an avenue near the apartment I rent in a neighborhood downtown, but for some inexplicable reason, he had stopped in his tracks. It was as if someone, an inner voice rather than from the outside, had ordered him to stand perfectly still on the sidewalk, his eyes staring at an ambiguous sun in the distance. I paused next to him because I thought the traffic light was preventing us from moving, but that wasn't it. And at that moment, I was able to register his tweed jacket, the slightly disproportionate size of his eyeglasses, the fact that he wasn't sweating despite the excess of his overcoat in the almost springtime heat, and especially the curious milky opalescence of his skin, which made him look like a stranger in town, a man who was not where he belonged. I crossed the avenue, and when I got to the other side, I turned around. He was still standing in the same position or at his post, his eyes drawn by some unfathomable magnet. I continued walking home, thinking of two of my all-time favorite stories, The Men of the Crowd by Edgar Allan Poe and Bartleby by Herman Melville, The Shadowy Creatures of Franz Kafka and Samuel Beckett, and a quotation from the Wind-Upper Chronicle, the great novel by Japanese novelist Haruki Murakami. You turn a corner and find a world you have never seen before. Once in my apartment, I connected to the internet and got on Twitter, that virtual aviary where birds try to find their own voice amid a deafening hue and cry. I remembered the individual I had just bumped into and wrote the following tweet. A man with enormous eyeglasses and a tweed jacket stares engrossed at the horizon on a busy corner. The sun lends him an otherworldly glow. And a little later, another tweet. I think I noticed that the man in the enormous eyeglasses and the tweed jacket moves his lips. I think I hear him mutter, "Look at me carefully. I could be your character." I hadn't suspected that this would be the beginning of a serial novelette or novelette tweet that would claim my attention for over a month. I finished it on Thursday, April 14, 2011, and that it would generate what would be for me an unanticipated interest in a group of readers. I like to speak of readers and not simply followers, that would grow exponentially alongside a plot centered precisely on this character. A man assembled by tweets, assuming that he is not where he should be, and who therefore undertakes a sort of anti-Odyssey, which tries to fuse fantasy and terror, classic adventure and metaphysical drift, the possibility of parallel universes, and the uneasiness with the reality that surrounds us. Now that the man in tweed walks on his own feet, thanks to the account I opened for him on Twitter, El Hombre de Tweed, now that the series he stars in already has 3 episodes or parts exceeding 300 pages, the first part is called The Man in Tweed, The City, the second one is The Man in Tweed, The Island, and the third one, The Man in Tweed, The Epidemic, I can't help thinking about the flesh and blood being that gave origin to him. Is he stuck on another bustling corner of the big city, his eyes glued to the horizon where the mysteries of the everyday are brewing? Well, this is the origin of my character and of my novel that now exceeds the 300 pages. And I'm going to read some fragments, maybe 10 minutes, of the first part called The Man in Tweed, The City. I have to say that many colleagues and many writers with which I have talked about this project always, stare at me like, how do you do it? How do you write a novel in Twitter? And they think that what I do is write, a novel in a conventional way and then, cut and paste. But that's not the idea. The idea is to make each tweet a paragraph. That is, condense the idea of a paragraph of a novel in 140 characters. That's the idea of my project. So I'm going to read 10 minutes of this project, of the first part called The Man in Tweed, The City. It opens with this quote from Haruki Murakami: you turn a corner and find a world you had never seen before. A man with enormous eyeglasses and a tweed jacket stares engrossed at the horizon on a busy corner. The sun lends him an otherworldly glow. There is a milky opalescence about the man in tweed, as if he were a rare jewel, as if he thought he were supposed to bring another luster to the midnight light. The horizon upon which the man in tweed fixes his gaze seems made of dirty fabrics. They wave languidly in a furtive breeze. The man in tweed blinks like an insect behind the glass of his spectacles. He looks around him. He has discovered that he is not where he should be. Something about the man in tweed brings to mind eccentric rituals, as in a whim to see the city streetlights going out as the afternoon fades. Each time the traffic light changes color, the man in tweed quivers imperceptibly. He thinks of a control panel surrounded by darkness. Sleeping will not be an option tonight, the man in tweed says to himself upon seeing that behind the steering wheels of the cars there are shadows instead of people. The man in tweed glances at his watch. The little hands stopped in their tracks while he was waiting on the corner. I need a map, he thinks. The heat of the oncoming spring weaves a membrane around the man in tweed. For a moment, he is a rare refraction of the light. A wasp flits around the head of the man in tweed. Suddenly, as if swatted by an invisible sword, it falls hacked in half on the sidewalk. The man in tweed decides finally to cross the street. A brunette brushes past him. Her rushing blood deafens him momentarily. Upon walking in front of a shop window, the man in tweed thinks he remembers something. The reflection of reeds in a lake upon which a green moon crawls. In the gait of the man in tweed, one can sense a thick confusion, the bewilderment of the diver who awakens without oxygen in an underwater cave. Made smaller by his eyeglasses, the eyes of the man in tweed looks like drops of India ink on a manuscript that someone left unfinished. Sweating, the man in tweed pauses in front of a store that looks dark inside. He reads the sign, groceries. He enters and says, "I need a map." The clerk at the counter looks up from the magazine he was reading to stare at the man in tweed. There are tiny electrical cracklings in the air. "A map?" The grocery store attendant repeats. "Yes, please," says the man in tweed, and his voice suggests a metallic prayer. "Maps aren't sold here," says the clerk. The man in tweed closes his eyes and imagines a sea of asphalt covered with cracks. The man in tweed blinks. He realizes he's totally lost. He turns toward the refrigerator filled with cold drinks. He hears the buzz of African bees. A telephone rings somewhere in the gloom that engulfs the store. The man in tweed shakes as if he had caught a flapping of wings. The clerk answers the telephone in the dark. He leaves his magazine on the counter. The man in tweed sees a woman shining, naked. While the clerk talks in whispers, the man in tweed approaches the counter. The naked woman seems on the verge of telling him something. The man in tweed picks up the magazine as if it were made of glass. He cautiously leaves through it just to see how the naked woman multiplies. Leafing through each page, the man in tweed begins to notice a hidden pattern, writing composed of skin and minuscule hairs. The man in tweed sharpens his hearing. The magazine gives off a rosary of moans originating, it would appear, in the heart of darkness of a pyramid. A radio creaks in the gloomy store. The man in tweed hears a piano that glides in and out like an unstable set of false teeth. The man in tweed stops at a double page. He thinks he recognizes that long hair, that dark complexion. He thinks he's again hearing a rush of blood. Is it possible? The man in tweed thinks. One bumps into a woman on the street who minutes later will reappear naked in a photograph. It must be a sign, the man in tweed says to himself, and the body before him begins to transform. The map, he then thinks, it must be the map. The transformation of the body takes his time. The man in tweed imagines mapmakers working in silence in quivering candlelight. The whispers of the clerk continue vaguely somewhere. How curious are those beings oblivious to transformation, the man in tweed reflects. The transfiguration ends. Trembling with amazement, the man in tweed observes the map that now occupies the place of the naked woman's body. As if the memory were coming from another lifetime, he recalls maps of skin. But what I have here, the man in tweed says to himself, surpasses that memory. Pentimento. That's the word the man in tweed has in mind upon confronting the map, traced not over but beneath that dark nudity. Tendons and muscles, the man in tweed comprehends, now comprise parks and city blocks. Arteries and veins are thin avenues and streets. The Mound of Venus, the man in tweed notes, has been replaced by a small square. The left nipple is now a red dot. You are here. The man in tweed takes off his eyeglasses to get closer to the map of the area where he is located. In the dim shadows, his eyes are two shining rubies. Anyone looking in this moment at the man in tweed might think of an alert owl on a branch at night, its gaze luminous. The man in tweed puts a finger on the dot marked, "You are here." He lets himself be guided by touch and goes up to what was the area of the mouth. The man in tweed interrupts the sweep of his finger to touch something under its tip. The blood-red brilliance of his eyes intensifies. A small crack in the paper is what the man in tweed touches. Where the lips of the naked woman were, there is now a word: hotel. The man in tweed studies the word as if it were a blue sphere. He then remembers: hotel with sea view, vacancy. The man in tweed also remembers a balcony facing an immense body of water that seems to breathe, a sky streaked with mineral clouds. The letters of hotel seem to open like doors before the man in tweed to reveal a hidden message: the possibility of relocation. Nervous, the man in tweed counts the streets between "You are here" and hotel, between the left nipple and the mouth of the woman. The man in tweed calculates a 30-minute walk. He puts his glasses on again. His eyes recover a conventional opacity. Well, thank you very much. Well, I don't know if you have any. Yeah.